Hello, Garland Nixon here. It is Thursday, and we're hanging out with Larry Johnson. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we are hanging out with the one and only Larry Johnson. Larry, thanks and welcome back. Thanks for hanging out with us again for another week.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just a couple of things before we really get going. There's a Valdai speech going on right now. President Putin is speaking.
Right.
I saw a few of the highlights. I know you've been covering it. You've been watching it. Any thoughts so far on what you've seen or heard?
Well, Gil Doctorow in a chat yesterday, I think with was it with Nima? Maybe with Nima, that was voicing saying that there's a lot of pushback against Putin now among the elite in Russia, thinking that he's too soft, and rumblings that they're going to try to remove Putin, get someone tougher in there. But just watching him at Valdai here, he's relaxed, not stressed at all. He's saying, look, we would like to get along with the West. We'd like to get along with Europe. They're the ones creating the problem, not us. And we're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to be threatened. And if you do certain things, we're going to react, we'll respond, and you'll regret that you did what you did. So, it's classic Putin that it doesn't get emotional, doesn't get flustered, stays calm, but determined. I think he sent some very clear messages that, basically, if we're attacked, we're going to retaliate and you'll regret it. So,
Well, it seems to me that when I look at President Putin, seems to be very grounded as far as, let me just say this, the Russian culture, they have their
mhm,
religions, beliefs, they have their cultural beliefs that are Russian. We're Russian. These are what we believe in. This is what we stand for,
right,
right? And if you go around the Russian people, you see great pride in their history and everything, right? And so, no matter how much the Starmers and the Macrons of the world rail and go crazy, and the Mertz says, "Oh, we want to do this and that," they seem to be unshakable because they know who they are. They know what they believe in. They know what
right.
they stand for. And so there's no reason for them to really, and you see that, I think, represented in President Putin. They're just unshakable. This is who we are. If you swing, we'll swing back when we're ready to swing back and in the way we're ready to swing back. We're not going to act in the way you expect us to act.
Yeah. Well, I just was with Danny Haifong and Colonel Wilkerson, and made the point that uh, the West, particularly the United States, has we don't even have a benchmark. We don't have a reference point to begin to understand and appreciate how much the Russian people have suffered and the historical scar this has left upon their collective consciousness. And, to have lost 27 million people in a war with the Germans, to have in the first year of that war, to have lost 3 million troops in like the first 8 months of Operation Barbarossa. And yet at no point did they collapse and crumble and, so we give up, it's too difficult, stop, and disappear into history. No, no, no. They fought on and they made history. Whereas here in the United States, the last kind of bloodletting we had was in the Civil War. 600,000. That 600,000 figure was just half the Battle of Stalingrad. Okay, and that was after 4 or 5 years of war in this country. Before that, the War of 1812, which we started, and the Brits went in and burned the White House. But other than that, you know, we, if those who have immigrated to the United States and settled it, we haven't suffered the kind of death and destruction the Russians have experienced. The Native Americans in this country, on the other hand, they have. They'll tell, the Trail of Tears by the Cherokee people as just one small example. So by miscalculating, misunderstanding Russia, boy, I see Trump and now J.D. Vance saying some really stupid stuff. I mean, it's, almost to insult Russia, and actually Putin did say this today, with respect to Trump calling Russia a paper tiger. He goes, so we're a paper tiger. We've been fighting for 2.5 years. An army that's backed entirely by NATO, that's trained entirely by NATO, that's armed by NATO, that receives intelligence from NATO, that's essentially a NATO proxy force. And yet, despite all that support from NATO, we keep moving forward on all fronts. So if we're a paper tiger, what's NATO?
That's a good one. You
Yeah.
just lost the fight to a paper tiger. What's that
Yeah,
make you?
So you must not be much, because we're paper tigers and we're kicking your ass.
Let me throw something at. We're going to get to Sonar 21. Sonar21.com is Larry's great website. A lot of great stories on it, and we always go over the most important stories of the week. Before we do, I just throw one other thing at you, and that is I just wrote a Substack, and in it, I made the point, and that was I'm sorry, I might as well bring it up. Let me see. There we go. Let me bring it up for people to look at. For those who would love to go to my Substack and subscribe. Charlie Kirk opposed the first Iran attack that has been limited. That problem has been eliminated. Pete Hegg says prepare for war comments seem to be targeting Iran. Charlie Kirk opposed the last attack, and now he's gone. And I made a point, not that this is the only motivation, but, they seem to be staging material for another, hapless attack on Iran. What a stupid thing to do. But, before Charlie Kirk reflected, I put the polls up there that, the young conservatives are in opposition in general to war. Yeah. They're opposed to foreign wars. They said, America first, spend the money here, take care of us. We don't want to know our money, blood, and treasure going overseas. And Charlie Kirk was a problem. He pushed back apparently to Trump. He had a show that he did that said Iran is Israel's war, not ours. He went on Megyn Kelly, and he was kind of saying, "Hey, I'm not down with this." And if you look at it, and they were preparing for war. Perhaps Charlie Kirk needed to be out of the way. Not that I'm implying that I have any inside information, pure speculation, but there were multiple motives, unfortunately. And the fact that Charlie Kirk could be a problem if they're planning another war could have been a problem that doesn't exist anymore for whatever reason, if you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Well, in fact, yesterday, Candace Owens reported, and she said she'll provide the receipt, she'll provide the evidence, that 2 days before Charlie was murdered, he had told his Zionist handler, this one rabbi, and the Zionist billionaires, basically, we can no longer have this kind of relationship. I'm not going to be subjected to this kind of pressure. If you want to take your money back, take your money back. Then he winds up getting killed. Just a coincidence. Yeah. So there is it's not just on with respect to Iran, it's also with respect to Venezuela. In fact, just as we're coming on air, I saw the news flash that Trump has now signed some executive order declaring Caribbean drug activity a national security threat. So he's now creating a document that he's going to use to justify an illegal, immoral attack on Venezuela. And, that may happen within the next 4 to 5
hours. Yeah.
So we're close on that. I think the war in Iran will follow on that. Trump now he's a disgrace. It's just he's acting illegally. But the real problem is that the generals that he had called to Washington on Tuesday, uh, that none of them are standing up and walking out and resigning and throwing their papers on the desk and saying, "Hey, I'm not going to be part of something that's illegal and criminal." Instead, but like the cowards they are, they just go whine behind the scenes. Oh, he was bad to us. But they still go grab their paycheck every 2 weeks. So, I mean, I'm fed up with them, particularly this woman that's the commander of Southcom. She is willfully participating in an illegal act of war. And, normally you'd think a woman might have more balls than some of the men, but no, she's living up the stereotype, weak, compliant, and doing what Trump wants to do.
Absolutely. Let's go to Larry. As I said, he's got a great website. I go there regularly. He has a lot of great articles on there. I suggest that you do too. And also, when you're there, don't forget, support us. It is difficult for people who are in this business. I use that word charitably, but who have chosen this course. It's pretty expensive. Larry's got to pay for this website. He's got to keep all this stuff going with little coming in to help him out. So please go there. You got PayPal, Patreon, buy me a coffee. Make sure you go there and help Larry keep this going. Donald Trump's dangerous tilt towards war at home and abroad. And you talk about his speech at Quantico. Larry, what do we need to know?
Well, this you saw, first of all, it was staged like the George C. Scott role in General Patton. The opening of the movie when he walks out and, it's not good that you die for your country, make the other poor bastard die for his, that kind of speech. Except the George C. Scott version was, pithy, pungent, somewhat, ironic, and short. Boy, Trump was a combination of Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, talking in a monotony. Garland, I'm really glad to be here. I'm so excited and thrilled that it is just a great honor to do this and this show. And I think God almighty, it's like a verbal sleeping pill, number one. And then I called it was a tour de farce, as opposed to a tour de force, the tour de farce of narcissism. Because it was, I did this and I did that and I did this and I stopped wars and if I didn't start this war, it would have, it's like, God, we've heard it so many times. Stop. Say something new for once, for God's sake, please. But the real disturbing thing out of his speech was when he talked about using U.S. deployment of U.S. troops, not just National Guard, but U.S. military forces to American cities, that they would get training in how to contain an enemy. So this is a clear violation of posse comitatus. The exception to that is if the governor of the state authorizes the deployment of the National Guard, then you can go with that. But and when Trump said that, that's the point at which at least 5 or 10 of those generals assembled there stood up and said, "No, sir. No, sir. That is a violation of the law. We will not do that," and walked out. That might have actually got some attention. But instead, they all sat there like a bunch of, bobblehead dolls bolted to their seats. Now, yeah, they didn't applaud. Okay. But that didn't take any courage, And so on top of it, and I discussed this a little bit yesterday with Danny Davis, and you're the excellent person to review this with. The difference between a military mindset and a law enforcement mindset is wide. Military mindset, you are trained that when you are confronted and you face resistance, you are to escalate and use maximum force possible to kill the other side. Law enforcement mentality, in theory, is to de-escalate if possible. And then, if and only if you are faced with an imminent situation of loss of your life, loss of someone else's life, or grievous bodily harm, only then can you use force. And I draw to the illustration that you got two drug traffickers on a corner in Baltimore, and they're walking up to a car, and you can see the exchange going on. If you're sitting there as an officer down the block, you spot it. You can't walk out and shoot them. Yeah, I mean, well, they're doing a bad thing. Yeah, but if you go up, you arrest them, caught in the act. Now, if they pull a gun in the process of you trying to arrest them, or a knife or some weapon and try to kill you, yes, then you can defend yourself. But it's that difference in mentality. And yet Trump seems to think military rule equates with law enforcement. And that's so damn dangerous.
Well, part of it also is this. Okay, if you're in the military, you close with and destroy the enemy. It's very binary. There's me, there's the enemy. The enemy's trying to kill me. I'm trying to kill the enemy. Fine. What is it that you see on the side of police cars? Now, people argue that maybe it doesn't apply as well as it should. But what do you see on the side of almost every police car?
Protect and
To
serve.
serve and protect.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
people out there are not your enemy. The people out there pay taxes. They pay your salary. When you find someone who's doing something to danger, when you call, hey, help, there's some guy breaking in my house. I'm supposed to go there and protect you, help protect your property, help make sure that people aren't doing crazy things, breaking down stuff,
Yeah.
spray painting all over the place, busting out windows. And even then, that person has they got rights. They're supposed to I have certain things I have to go through to ensure that evidence is admissible in court, all this kind of stuff. You are there to help maintain order, not to close with and destroy the enemy. I don't even blame the troops if they get involved in things. They're not trained to go out there and maintain order, serve and protect, things like that. So, as you said, you're using the wrong tool. Remember, Stanley, the right tool for the right job?
Yeah.
You don't need a screwdriver. Well, I'll put it like this. You don't need a sledgehammer when a screwdriver will do. And that's what you're doing. You're using a sledgehammer, and it's a dangerous mentality. And it goes to show to some extent the acceptance. And this is something I have a problem with. I remember when Biden, and he was trying to do these domestic terrorist stuff. It's bad news. You're starting to, and he was running around, the MAGA people are doing this, and the MAGA people, and the MAGA, and I'm like, man, that's dangerous rhetoric there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're like saying that certain elements, political elements, who are exercising their constitutional rights, whether you agree with them or not, you're a different party, whatever, you don't agree with them, but that they're somehow evil and the enemy and they're terrorists. You're setting a stage for violence against these people, be it the government or other people. And Trump's using the same rhetoric that I opposed under Biden, and now he's back to the same game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is, I said the last time I've seen troops on street corners carrying automatic weapons and with armored vehicles, that was Bogota, 2001, 2002. They were in the midst of some terrorist attacks, and you had the military deployed, but that's not a good look. And I contrast that with Moscow. So I was there in December of 23, February 24, December, November, I think, of 24, and then, March of 24, and then March of 25, and June of 25. So St. Petersburg once, Moscow 4 times. I hardly saw any police, much less soldiers on street corners with automatic weapons. So it says something bad about the United States where, we have to appear like a city under siege, whereas Russia, who's supposedly this grand authoritarian state, people go about their business and, the cops are hardly visible.
One of the things that you talk about is, changing the Department of Defense to the Department of War, and coupled with all of this other rhetoric. There are diplomats around the world who look for opportunities to, come to peaceful agreements with, maybe India, maybe different countries are saying, how can we figure out how we can work this thing out where there's no shooting and there's no nuclear weapons? When you call it the Department of War, when you say we must prepare for war, our enemies will FAFO. Hegseth sounds like such a lowbrow goon to me. The man's a
Yeah, yeah,
politician. He is not an intellectual by any stretch of the imagination. He's a goon, which
yeah,
is fine for a guy who's a grunt.
yeah.
Officer first class, fine. Navy SEAL, great. The guy who's in charge of this operation is supposed to be, he is a political appointee. He is a politician. But Hegseth, it doesn't seem to get through his thick skull.
Yeah, no, it was Hegseth's presentation, I frankly found shocking and embarrassing. But again, it goes to it's really a lack of maturity. We had the Secretary of War during World War II, I believe, and it was only in the aftermath of World War II. I could be mistaken on this, but I think that was when it became the Department of Defense. Why? Well, because we were no longer at war. We were in a defensive posture trying to keep peace, not trying to spread war. And so just having this kind of change in language also reflects a change in attitude, and not a change for the better. We've had too much war. If we could put your show to music, we would have Edwin Starr now sing, his iconic song, War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Here we have
when I went through menopause.
Sorry about that.
What was happening to my hair?
The Trump administration sent a memo to Congress on Thursday. The United States is now listen to this, a non-international armed conflict. I don't even know what that means, with drug cartels, which administration officials have designated as terrorist organizations. The notification of congressional lawmakers came on Democrat. Okay, here's the bottom line. They accuse the administration of exceeding its powers to use the military against the cartels. Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. So he's saying now, it's like you're making up things.
Yeah.
They're in a non-international armed conflict. There is no legal term. There is no legal classification of that. You just made that up. And then and might I add, if there was a drug dealer, as we said with police, you got to prove the person's a drug dealer. That's not an armed conflict. Well, I'll put it like this. Are they shooting at you? No. If they ain't shooting at you, you're just going to say, we're going to start shooting at you. Nah, but we decide to shoot at them. The whole thing is preposterous. And here's what I say. It's George W. Bush. We want the oil from Venezuela, so we'll cook up a preposterous lie. He might as well have said that Maduro has weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knows that it's a preposterous lie about the oil. And here's the man who accurately said, yeah, they lied us into a war in Iraq. And remember, they went berserk when Trump said that. Oh, he's terrible. How dare he say that? But he told the truth. And now he's doing the same darn thing in Venezuela.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. That, when I saw that, it said, okay, next up, it's not long. I don't know. Like I said, the attack may come within the next 24 hours.
Yeah. And then what? What happened if Venezuela shoots back and hits one of those ships with missiles? They have some missiles. They got some planes. What happens if they hit a couple of those ships, sink of those ships? What are you going to do then? Oh, they've killed our guys. We're going to declare war. You attack them.
Yeah.
And what are you going to say? We're going to declare war? How are you going to declare war? War on everybody? War in Iran, war in Venezuela? Are you going to put troops in those jungles to go walking through fighting in the jungles of Venezuela? That ain't going to work out well. It's just a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Trump was gifted an incredible opportunity on January 20th of this year that he really could have been a transformational president by bringing an end to the wars, including the genocide in Gaza, and embarking upon, basically, I'll call it the Rodney King strategy. Can't we all just get along? And to focus on that. You've seen now that he's going begging to China because the soybean farmers in the United States have just been gutted because of his tariff policy. The China's said basically, screw you and your soybeans. We'll buy from Brazil. And our soybean farmers are crying. They're in debt. They can't sell their crop. They're not making the money that they needed to make in order to stay afloat. So, now Trump has to go begging hat in hand to the Chinese, please buy our soybeans.
I've said this, I mean, to be quite frank, I've said this all along. If I were China, I'd say, aren't you bragging about the missiles you just put in the Philippines and Japan and missile launchers aimed at me? Aren't you bragging about the troops and all of the stuff you have in Taiwan? Do you think I'm going to buy stuff from you? I'm going to give you things that you can buy missiles? No, thanks, pal.
Yeah.
You have to back off and say, we're taking those missiles out. We're not going to threaten China. As long as you got your crosshairs pointed at me, forget it. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've heard this. I tell you who is selling soybeans to China: Argentina.
Yeah, and Brazil.
And we're bailing them out for $20 billion. Now, those poor stinking farmers, you screwed the farmers with your foreign policy. You ain't bailing them out because only the banks get bailed out. Those poor darn farmers who voted for him, who work in the dirt, who do what they got to do to provide a living for their families and all the people that work around there, screw them. And now $20 billion, another bailout?
Yeah, I know. It's just, you got a lot of buyer's regret now amongst those farmers who voted for Trump.
It's, you look at it and you're like, what's it, Jimmy Dore say? No matter who you vote for, you get John McCain.
Yeah.
He's turning into Biden. In Ukraine, he's certainly turning into Biden. Now, something else that you talked about is the European leaders. Once again, we're talking with Larry Johnson, and let me remove this for those of you who haven't seen it. Larry's fantastic website, Sonar 21, and we're checking out his article, Donald Trump's dangerous tilt towards war at home and abroad. And something else that you talked about was the discussion in Europe about about stealing Russia's. Well, apparently, it used to be 300 billion. Then I heard 200 and some billion. I've heard 170 billion. I think they already stole some of it, Larry. But at any rate, the number seems to be going down. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out a way to take that money and give it to Ukraine, and then have Ukraine, quote, pay it back eventually. The problem they've got is it's done this organization called Euroclear, and basically they rely upon, their business depends upon people believing that if they deposit their money with them, that the money's not going to get stolen, that it will be safe. And if Europe does this, they basically said, hey, if we decide that we don't like you for whatever reason, then we're going to steal your money. And so there's been that pressure against it that's been taking place within Europe. But so the Europeans they're becoming very belligerent and making threats against Russia on the financial front. Then that was followed up by the French seizing a Russian oil tanker in just off the coast of France, claiming it's violating sanctions. And Russia's given them sort of a deadline, either release the ship or else. Now we don't know what the or else will be, but it's not going to be nice. Then you had the French Army Chief of Staff say yesterday that France needs to organize for war. It could come any day now. So Macron, instead of trying to calm things down, they're pouring gasoline on the fire. It's going to burn hotter. And then in tandem with that, you've got all this trash talking, we talked about earlier from Trump and JD Vance towards Russia. And so Russia's still going to keep taking care of business like it has been, and defeating Ukraine on the battlefield. Would like to have a good relationship with the United States, but if not, they'll fight us. And they've made it very clear. If any attacks with long-range missiles facilitated by Western military personnel on Moscow, St. Petersburg, or other sensitive facilities in Russia will be considered an act of war. Then we're into a whole new ballgame.
And what's weird to me is Trump was like, okay, I know what's going on here and I understand it and we don't want any problems. He goes and meets with the freaking King of England. Seems like he comes out of there and he transformed into Joe Biden and Keir Starmer.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's typical Trump. He tells whoever the last person, he listens to the last person he talked to. So there's no firm convictions on his part other than the one thing he loves in this world more than anything else is himself. So anything that's going to promote him, make him look good, make him the best, that's where his focus is.
And apparently the Army Chief of Staff said that here's the other part. The French Army Chief of Staff announced that French troops must be ready for the start of an intense warfare as early as the night. Here's the problem. For all of the big talk that Starmer and those people have, right? The Russians actually have a military. They actually have a military industrial complex. If war was needed, they're prepared to defend their country adequately. Right. I read somewhere, I think the UK has between 24 and 40 tanks that they can use.
Right.
All of the long-term, pretty much all of the French's long-term artillery was blasted to pieces in Ukraine. They got nothing, barely a schnitzel to hold on to in Germany, in the German military. You look at them and you're like, they're talking, you would think that they had, the NATO war machine of 1982 at this point. That's all gone. They got nothing. It seems like they're like doing all the, as they say, selling all the wolf tickets about war, but it's all, let's get this thing going so we can drag the U.S. in. Everybody wants to drag Netanyahu. Everybody's about dragging the U.S. in.
Yeah, when you look at actual ground forces, if you could take all of the U.S., if the U.S. could take rather up all of its Army and Marine Corps battalions, regiments, and combine it with all that Britain has, which is about, I think, 30,000, and the French and the Germans, they would still be not even half the size of what is the current active Russian army. So who are we kidding? We think we can take on Russia when we're half, NATO combines half the size. And now they can say, well, we can add up all the NATO troops and we got 1.3 million. Yeah, that's an ugly patchwork quilt there, baby. They just, in terms of standard operating procedures, not too many of those, different types of equipment. In theory, there's supposed to be able to be a lot of interoperability, but you'll find out not even prepared. And, so it's just, it's a fantasy that they've indulged in, but it's a dangerous fantasy because, Russia is left with no choice but to take them seriously.
Yeah, based on their history. And look, let's not forget, it's been pretty clear. North Korea has said, hey, you fight Russia, you fight us.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a significant military presence. Not that Russia even needs them. China, the Chinese, I don't remember if it was Wang Yi, I think it was a couple months back. You'll probably remember this. You covered all of this stuff, who said, well, we couldn't let Russia lose in the Ukraine conflict. The Chinese said we couldn't let that happen. And they know, they read the grand chessboard that they want to take Russia right up to, then they're going right up to their border, then they take China out, they cut off everything. So they already know if Russia has in trouble, got in a fight, North Korea's in it, and China has said it's existential. If it looks like Russia's losing, we can't let that happen. So it's the definition of World War III.
Yeah, I see it's shaping up that I think Trump will get us embroiled in one or more of these wars. And just as happened to the Brits during World War I, where prior to World War I, the United Kingdom was the most powerful country on the face of the earth in terms of reach, control of territory, wealth. It was sort of the center of the universe. And World War I destroyed that. Bled them dry, both financially and in terms of manpower. It set in motion the various colonies that no longer wanted to be colonies of the United Kingdom. It fueled the peace movement in India and Mahatma Gandhi. In the same fashion, if the United States gets us embroiled in this war with Iran and with Venezuela, I think we'll be looking at, we're looking at the real end of U.S. hegemony within the world, particularly on the economic front. We're going to get isolated and become even a pariah of sorts. Not a good position to be in.
I think you're right. And, a war with Iran could not could, if the U.S. is involved in a war with Iran, it will disrupt the flow of oil, dramatically increase the cost of things, if we're lucky, it'll only drive inflation through the roof. If we're unlucky, it'll create hyperinflation. And people have said this for a while. If Donald Trump goes to war with Iran, it will end his presidency effectively. It will effectively end his presidency because he's already got people that don't like him. He has a lot of his supporters who are pissed because they feel like they didn't get what they voted for. And now we're seeing the young people that would be the ones that they would want to draft and go to war saying, I'm not down with fighting for Israel. It would be, not even a year in. I think it would effectively end his presidency. It would end as a credible presidency. People would start looking at J.D. Vance and say, how the hell can you get us out of this? I think.
Yeah. Well, and I used to have some hopes for J.D. Vance, thinking, okay, at least he's articulate, he appears thoughtful, he's got a good life story. But, what he said in the last few days about Russia just says, my God, you've sold out, he just sold out to the whole narrative of, Russia's weak, Russia's a paper tiger, again, insulting Russia. What a contrast with the Russians. You never hear them, at least you never hear Putin or Lavrov or the deputy foreign minister Rybkov saying insulting things about the United States. And God knows, man, they got some right material. Now, maybe Medvedev might, Medvedev's sort of a man after my own heart. He's very pretty funny and biting sense of humor. But what you realize is that the United States insults and Russia doesn't. And Russia always tries to put the most positive spin on it, and being sort of the adult in the room.
Well, and when you look at it, here's what I say. Okay, you came in, Trump and Vance, and you went over, you lectured the Europeans about free speech. I agree with you everything, but you ain't doing too well on free speech necessarily yourself here. But then you take a position on Russia, on the Ukraine conflict, and it's in opposition to Macron and Starmer and Merritt. And then you say, these people are a bunch of clowns. They're woke. They're a bunch of idiots. I agree. They're a bunch of clowns and idiots. Okay. Right. But who won? They didn't come over to your position. You have come over to their position. You told us that they were stupid, they were weak, they were clowns. I agreed, but they won and you lost. And now you're saying what they once said, and they haven't changed their rhetoric. So you can talk about them, and I'll agree with all of those things. But they have defeated Donald Trump. Rhetorically, narrative-wise, they have defeated Donald Trump. He has lost, and they have won. And that's clear.
Yeah. I was watching, it was interesting. Somebody at this, first Putin did the 45-minute speech at Valdai. Then he sat down for sort of a question and answer session with the audience. And somebody asked something about Trump. And what he said was, that Trump, he he can be emotional, but basically said you can also talk to him and in private, and he's more practical. So again, he didn't take the opportunity to rip Trump, and he did actually try to sort of diffuse the criticism, and so I think Russia sees that they're doing everything in their power to avoid a war with the United States. I'm not sure that Trump and the people around him are doing everything in their power to avoid a war with Russia. That's the fear.
Or anybody at this point. Who don't they want a war with? You know what I mean? At this
Yeah.
point, there's like Netanyahu's playing in an eight front war, and apparently the final front is us. Trump now he wants a three front. Well, it's absurd. Let's go back to sonar21.com. Larry Johnson, another great article. Was Trump's meeting with the U.S. military brass today a cover for action? What do you think that action is? What do you mean when you say cover for action, Larry?
Okay, and first note that cartoon is done by someone named Nemo. I think he was going after the movie Matrix. But what is it actually is pretty funny as far as the allegations of the Zionists killing Charlie Kirk, and Netanyahu saying, "Oh no, I'm too busy killing other people to have had time to kill Kirk." But yeah, a cover for action is if with the naval force deployed off the coast of Venezuela, and this F-35, a squadron of combat jets parked in Puerto Rico, and then you call up the commander of Southcom, this woman, to come up for consultations at the Pentagon and at the White House. Well, that would attract a lot of attention. And even if they tried to do it quietly, it would still, the word would get, hey, the commander of Southcom was just here. By bringing in everybody from around the world for a talk that turned out to be just nothing, that's a way you could disguise your plans to go to war under this, this broader. We're just meeting with the boys and girls to tell them what there's a new sheriff in town and how things are going to work. So, that came that was a suggestion by Eve Smith at Naked Capitalism, and I thought it was a pretty astute point. I think you absolutely could make that case. We shall see, because if particularly if we're at war with Venezuela in the next 3 to 4 days, 5 days, then it would definitely send a message.
I think you're right. And the other thing is the update on Charlie Kirk, and
Right.
that is, and we've talked about this. The idea that you can shoot somebody with a 30-06. Just the idea that you could shoot a human body with a 30-06 and there would be no exit wound. The whole back of the body would be an exit wound. It would blow everything to smithereens.
Yeah. And his head, candidly, his head would have been half severed, if not totally severed. So I got a message from another person that you might know, who is connected to, has got good ties with the top of Talking Points USA, and he was told that there was in fact an autopsy done, and in fact Candace Owens confirmed that yesterday as well. And that what had happened is the bullet, when it entered in through Charlie's neck, ricocheted off the back of the spine, and it basically exploded in the heart. Now, that all took 1/130th of a second. Okay, it's just not a. If you frame a film as 30 frames or in a second to film. So in that just brief 1/130th is that bullet entered and fragmented and exploded, destroying the heart. And because all we had initially was what we could visually see. We could visually see Charlie react with, he starts forward, the arms stiffen. We see the neck expand. We see the front of the T-shirt and the back of the T-shirt pop up. You know, so they pop up, and you're trying to say, okay, what causes that? Well, if you have an explosion go off inside of you, but it's not such an explosion that it tears the skin and blood and gore come flooding out, that's what you saw. And there is a subsonic version of the 300 blackout, which is the round I think I would nominate it as the most likely one that could have caused that. But the point was, once the heart is dead, it's no longer pumping, then that artillery, because the one thing I was puzzled by, it severed the carotid artery. It had to, right? It was right. The carotid is right there. And yet normally anybody that's seen an arterial blood flow, it spurts, it's like a garden hose pumping out rhythmically. We didn't see that. What saw was this just suddenly a massive blood flow, just, incredible. He was dead at that instant.
Yeah.
I mean, he suffered damage to the cerebral cortex. That's why he got that stiffening of the arms as he fell back. He was gone. But you've got to. What's fascinating is the FBI continues to push this nonsense that he was shot with a 30-06, and then was shot by this kid Tyler Robinson. I guarantee you, Tyler Robinson didn't shoot him. Or if Tyler Robinson fired a gun that day, it was not that Mauser 30-06. No way.
Yeah, that story just now that they've told us it's a miracle. That's really is the icing on the cake. It's a miracle because if a 30-06 round had struck his spine, it ain't going to ricochet off and go bouncing around. It's going to blow everything to pieces. And the idea that a 30-06 with that amount of size and weight and speed is coming in there and it didn't leave the body.
Yeah, it's
just not a plausible argument.
Yeah, it's like 2,400 foot-pound per second, which is enormous. At that article at sonar21.com, I posted a video from this former Special Forces sergeant. He goes by Valhalla VFT.
Mm-hmm.
And so they actually shoot a steel plate, a 3/8-inch steel plate with a 30-06. Penetrates the steel. So don't tell us that a 30-06 went in his neck, and even despite the cavitation, the waves, the explosive waves created, that it struck the neck and that stopped it. No, sorry, that dog don't hunt.
And that story that he had a spine of steel. Don't try to get me to believe a miracle.
Yeah,
I don't need a miracle.
well,
I need you to show me physically what happened. And if you get to the point where the only thing that gets you out of it is a miracle, I don't believe you anymore. Hey, this happened and that happened. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Would you believe we had a miracle? No, I wouldn't believe there was a miracle.
yeah, well, if what kind of miracle is it he's dead?
Good
Okay.
point.
Now, if he got shot in the net like that and then stood up and was alive, okay, man, I'd call that a miracle. I'd be believing some, we've seen something here that's quite very unusual, but that's not what happened. The Valhalla VFT, he also shot the femur of a cow and packed 3-4 inches of meat on front of that femur. Now, a cow femur, it's
Oh, yeah.
a cow femur. It's about the size of this cup.
Yep.
Big. When the 30-06 hit that femur, boom, shattered it, and the bullet kept continuing on. So I said, the real question is, why is the FBI lying like this about what happened? Why? And the Candace Owens came out yesterday very strong, as is Tucker Carlson, that according to Candace, and she says she's got the communications with Charlie to prove it. Charlie was basically telling his Zionist handlers, we're moving on from you. I can no longer continue to basically be a shill for Israel. And then 2 days later, he's dead. Just a coincidence.
And they come up with a letter. Well, here's what's interesting about that letter. It was last May. What happened in June? June is when he was in the White House saying, hey, we shouldn't do this Iran thing. The Iran thing happened. He did a show called Iran is Israel's war, not America's. When the Iran thing happened, it seems to me that's when he got an upswell from his supporters saying, hey, we don't want these foreign wars. So it's interesting that they gave you a letter before the event, the attack on Iran, that really seems to have started causing him to get freaked out a little bit. So they give you this thing prior to that, nothing afterwards. And if he even wrote the letter, again, we got some highly suspect text messages. I don't know if anybody wrote anything. I don't know if I should believe anything in this story anymore.
Yeah. No, it's I give Candace Owens a lot of credit. She sometimes will make some leaps of logic, but overall, she's pretty data driven. It has to be because of some of the legal threats against her. If she's not, if she makes an accusation and claim without being able to back it up, she could be having a pretty expensive day to pay money out. But she's very sure about this. And look, the fact of the matter was she started off with Charlie and doing the TPUSA tell me I'm wrong gigs on college campuses. So, she's in a better position. And the fact that she's been so vociferously attacked by the Zionist crowd. Yeah, I got to admit, I don't know if you saw Tucker's latest show that he posted last night.
No.
Oh man, he's on the Israeli death list now for sure, because he took them on strong. He basically said, why is it that we, the benefactors, the supporters of Israel, should be held hostage by 7 million people and make us surrender our policy and our interest to theirs? And that if you dare to question it, you're an anti-Semite? That they ought to be registered as foreign agents? AIPAC ought to be registered as foreign agents, he said. I mean, he was on fire. And then he interviewed Jeffrey Sachs. So
here's the other thing. Let's see. You've got something here about a 300 it looks BLK ballistic trade, and you talk about cavitation and the shock wave,
right?
And what's all of that about? You talked about frangible rounds, different kind of rounds. They haven't told us what kind of round it is, whether or not it's supposedly a fully metal jacketed round, whether it's a hollow. We don't even know anything, nothing really, other than there's a miracle. That's all we know, is that a miracle occurred.
Yeah. So if I should have brought the props. I could show you an M1 Garand, which is similar to a Mauser.
Yep.
Big rifle, can't see. Well, actually, it's about. Yeah, I've got a golf club that is about the size of a golf club. Well, there's no way you can hide that. You could potentially hide it in your pants, but you would be walking stiff leg. Like Captain Peg leg. The photographs that were released allegedly of Tyler Robinson climbing up the stairs of the backpack shows him bending both the right leg and the left leg. So that right away tells you that there was no gun hidden in his pants. And it doesn't fit in a backpack. Even if you quote break it down, you'd have time. I saw someone disassemble one in 43 seconds. But then when it comes apart, because the police said that the round was still found chambered, or at least the empty shell casing that had been fired was still chambered. There's no way that would have been possible if you disassembled it.
You
So
got to
what?
open up the bolt to action thing, right, in order to do it.
Right. So and the bolt has to. I mean, so it just takes it all apart, and it's a mess. The 300 blackout is a round that has the capability to inflict the kind. Yeah, there's a good picture of
There's
it.
one. That's what we're supposed to believe, that he took this apart and stuck this in his pants, stuck it under in his pants, and then he went wandering around with this big old hunk of steel and wood in his pants, and jumped off roofs, climbed around, wandered around neighborhoods, ran, I don't know, then stuck it back together with the bullet. Well, obviously he took it apart, and then when he put it back together, he opened it and stuck the bullet back in.
Yeah, yeah.
For some reason, if
Oh,
whatever, I don't
actually, he stuck that empty shell casing back in. Yeah, because the bullet had already been fired. So, what he hadn't done before was if you pull that bolt up and pull it back, then that extracts the shell casing and ejects it. But the reason I focused in on 300 blackout, the 300 blackout is a round that can be fired from guns that can be easily concealed in a backpack. And they're short barreled rifles, but can actually make that shot at 200 yards if needed, are capable of doing that. So, and this was to show as well the damage, explain why we only see that one hole in Charlie's neck, and we don't see any exit wounds. And that's where we get to a frangible bullet. A frangible bullet is a bullet that was designed that once it penetrated into a human body would start breaking up, because they originally had these bullets that would be fired that would just pass all the way through the body, and then they'd continue on and hit some innocent bystander. A frangible bullet looks like is the best explanation, but not the only explanation, for finding fragments in his body, and the fact that cavitation, when a bullet's traveling that fast, it creates wind resistance behind that flows with it. It's cutting through wind, and then when it hits into tissue, fluid tissue, that it sets off cavitation, which are waves, and they spread out 360 degrees in all directions, and it's like an explosion going off. When you see the bomb and it goes boom, that's cavitation that coming out. When that bullet went in, it created cavitation, and it literally did it within 1/30th of a second. That destroyed Charlie's heart, which then goes on to explain the other visible signs of how he reacted to being shot. And there's a lot of different stories being put out, but like an exploding microphone. Well, the microphone was still intact.
Yeah.
How the hell did it explode and stay intact after Charlie shot?
Right.
It
would, and it would move, it would go flying, it would have some reaction, some recoil. If it had like a bullet in it that fired, well, then it would go flying the other way. It would naturally have some kinetic reaction to an explosion going on in the microphone, and you'd see most likely smoke. You'd see something, a burn on a shirt. The shirt would be burned. There'd be a lot of things.
Yeah, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Was that first law of thermodynamics?
Yes. Yep.
And you see that when you fire a pistol or anything, that whatever the explosion going out is, the recoil going back in the opposite direction. And yet we're told some guy wanted to sell this as a microphone that exploded, but it moved in this direction. When if it was there and exploded, it should have gone in that direction. But we see the violence of this cavitation effect is what, because I was sitting there trying to say, what would cause Charlie's T-shirt? It was both poofed out,
yes,
and up, and it did that in the front and the back.
Yes. Oof.
And that's because inside the chest there was this explosion, and it just the waves continued through. The waves are what moved the shirt, but it didn't cause any exit wound.
Yeah, that pretty much rules out a 30-06. I tell you that right now, completely rules that out. And so they got a problem. Well, here what we have, sonar21.com. That is Larry's outstanding website. Make sure you go there. Make sure you become a subscriber. And of course, PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, however you can, whatever you can do to afford to support it is great. Make sure that you just share sonar21.com on all your social media platforms. Oh man, I forgot even to put my little banner going across the bottom. There you go. So you know who I am and everything that's going on with me. Thanks a lot, Larry. I certainly appreciate it. And everybody, Sonar21, keep up with what's going on. Thanks a lot, Larry, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Brother Garland. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you soon. Everybody, share this on